I'd like to open our first session, which is Privacy by Design, Privacy by Default, and Data Security. We're going to start with our keynote speaker's video presentation, Anne Cavoukian. She's from Ryerson University. Everyone knows her from her Privacy by Design 7 Principles. She couldn't make it here, but she recorded this amazing video for us, so we'll be watching it.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anne Cavoukian, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today, although I wish I could be there in person. Istanbul is just amazing. And I love it that this is the first Istanbul Privacy Symposium, and that you kindly asked me to speak to you about privacy by design and some of the essentials for privacy by default and data security. And I call them essentials because they're essential to preserving privacy and freedom and, of course, security. So grab this, my apologies. Let's begin. I always want to begin by dispelling the myths because there's so many myths out there. So forgive me, but whenever I have a captive audience, I always want to say a few words on privacy, what it is and what it is not. It is not security. Privacy is not about having something to hide. Please. Privacy is all about control. It's about personal control on the part of the individual. Autonomy, user control, all of this is critical. You have to be free to choose how you want your information used and to whom you wish to have it disclosed. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination. An amazing term, simple concept, that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And they thought it was such an important value, they enshrined it as a right in their constitution in 1983. And it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich. And when that ended, they said, never again will we allow the government, the state, to strip us of our privacy and our freedom. Privacy forms the foundation of freedom. And they stood up to that. During my 3 terms as privacy commissioner, I went to a number of conferences in Germany. Every conference was started with a reference to that time, and they've stood up to that. See, the reason for this is very important. Context is key. Only the individual knows the context associated with certain personal information. And they're the only ones who know if the information is sensitive or not. They're the only ones who can make that decision. I would say, look, privacy is not a religion. You want to give away your information? Do it. Be my guest. As long as you do it knowingly, that it's your decision as the data subject. As I mentioned, privacy is essential to freedom and societal well-being. You cannot have free and open societies without a foundation of privacy. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. It is the exact opposite. It is such a huge negative consequence, and it really limits your cognitive bandwidth. I'm speaking I'm a psychologist, that's my background. And I know that when historically you look at societies where there was no freedom, no privacy, everything goes inward. You don't do blue sky thinking, you go inward, you start looking over your shoulder, you really alter your behavior. That's not what we want. That's the opposite of prosperity and freedom. Now I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design. I call it the decade of privacy by design because in 2010, so first of all, privacy commissioners once a year get together for an international conference. It's usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Israel, in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day conference, we have a half-day closed session where commissioners can bring forward resolutions to be voted on by the Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. So I introduced a resolution that year that privacy by design should be unanimously passed, hopefully unanimously passed, as an international standard to complement regulatory compliance, which is after the fact. Privacy by design is all about proactively introducing measures that will prevent the privacy harms from arising. It's like a model of prevention. And what amazed me was that it was unanimously passed. That was huge, and I didn't expect it, because as I said, I'm a psychologist, but most commissioners are amazing lawyers, what I call lawyers. They drill down into section 29, sub 2, part A, and apply the law to the fact situation to provide an excellent resolution to the problem. Very valuable, no question. But I was arguing that that was not enough. In this day and age of ubiquitous computing, massive online connectivity, social media abounding, it just wasn't enough. And when I started talking to the commissioners afterwards, thanking them for their vote, and just inquiring, because I wanted to know why everybody voted in favor of it, what I understood is they also realized that with all of that activity taking place, we as commissioners were only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the privacy harms, that the majority of the privacy harms were remaining unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. And that's what was unacceptable to the commissioners, that we needed something that complemented regulatory compliance, which is always after the fact, and we felt that was no longer sustainable as the sole means to ensure the future of privacy. We needed something upfront, proactively, to prevent the harms from arising, much like a medical model of prevention. So we've had great luck with Privacy by Design. It's been translated into 40 languages, which I'm delighted with. It has a real global presence. And not a week would go by when I was commissioner when I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction as to what they were doing in terms of implementing Privacy by Design. So the proactive nature is essential. You want to bake the privacy protective measures into your data architecture, bake it into your code, into your policies to prevent the harms from arising. The second essential Privacy by Design is get rid of zero-sum models. Zero-sum means you can only have a positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, such that the two total to a sum of zero. In my world, that didn't cut it, because it was never privacy that did the positive gain, nor did I want it to be, but I sure as heck didn't want it to lose. So get rid of zero-sum, substitute positive sum. Positive sum just means you can have two positive gains in two areas at the same time. And I talk to technologists all over the world, data scientists, cryptographers, all the brilliant tech minds, cryptographers, to ask them to make sure they could do this. Can you really embed privacy into your operations seamlessly up front at the development stage? Every single one said, yes, of course we can do it. You know, we're smart. They're confident. That's what you want. They said, it's nonsense, this either-or proposition. Bruce Schneier, a dear colleague, a leading cryptographer, he said, Anne, it's a false dichotomy, this either-or, one or the other, win-lose. You're just creating unnecessary trade-offs. We can do both. But we have to know about it up front. And that's the thing. You have to get rid of the silos. Everyone has to talk to each other, the policy people, the tech people, the legal folks, and create a request that goes to the IT team who's developing the program, for example, making sure that privacy is part of the equation. And that's what's critical. You have to do this up front, not after the fact when the program is done and delivered, and then somebody says, bolt on a privacy solution. They said, look, we can do it, but it's never going to be as good as if we seamlessly baked it into the whole thing. I'm sure you can understand that. These are the 7 foundational principles of Privacy by Design. I've covered a number of them. Let me just talk to you about number 2, privacy as the default setting for a moment. That's the opposite of what happens now. What happens now and in the past is if you want privacy, you have to wade through all the legalese and the terms of service and the pages and pages and the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection. We know nobody does that. You know, life is short, but it doesn't mean people don't want it. Public opinion polls have never come in higher for concern for privacy. I've been in this business well over 20 years. In the last 2-3 years, all the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, etc., they're coming in the 90 percentile. 91% are very concerned about their privacy. 92% are very concerned about the loss of control over their personal information. And trust is at an all-time low. There's such a trust deficit. But if you embed privacy as the default, it reverses all of that, goes from black to white. What it says to your customers, to citizens, is we automatically protect your data. Privacy is embedded into our operations as the default. You don't have to ask for it. We give it to you automatically. We can only use your information for the primary purpose of the data collection. And if we have a secondary use for it that arises down the road, we'll come back to you and seek your positive consent. And the beauty of that is that trust, it builds such trusted business relationships with your customers so that when you do go back, if you have a secondary use, you want to seek consent, they always say yes. That's what I've been told by so many companies because that trust has developed. You keep the customers you have their loyalty, and it attracts new opportunity. It truly is a win-win proposition. You can do this, privacy and security, privacy and data utility. Let me just speak for security for a moment, number 5. While privacy, the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of massive cybersecurity attacks on a daily basis, if you don't have a strong foundation of security from end to end with full lifecycle encryption, full lifecycle protection, including very strong encryption, you're not going to have any privacy. I'm a big fan of encryption, especially data at rest. Once you've used the data and it served the purpose you needed, first of all, I would like you just to get rid of it, erase it, you delete it, you don't need it anymore. But if you feel you need to keep it, don't leave it in plain text. Encrypt the data so that when hackers come and they see it's encrypted, they're going to say, okay, forget it. They're going to go on to the next target, an easier target where the data are not encrypted. So those 7 foundational principles of privacy by design, I created them, at my kitchen table many years ago over several nights. And you may think, well, maybe it sounds good, but it's an academic formulation. It's not going to work in the real world. Au contraire. When I was commissioner, everything had to work on the ground right then and there. And so we worked with all the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course, and I'm leaving out a bunch. We did papers with them. This paper, Operationalizing Privacy by Design, it's a compilation of 22 papers we did with all of those companies and many others that I'm forgetting at the moment on these subjects to show that you could, in fact, do this. It's real. You can make it work for you in wonderful ways, privacy and data utility. One example with Intel, remote home healthcare. With the aging population, the demographics of our aging population, a lot of elderly people want to live at home even though they're on their own. They prefer to stay at home, but they might need help from time to time. So Intel developed these great sensors that you can attach, of course, with full positive consent of the individuals involved. You could attach to various parts of the home to offer the individuals assistance. So let's say someone gets up in the middle of the night and they need to use the restroom, but they don't return within a predetermined period of time. The sensor on the bed will indicate that this individual hasn't returned and she may need help. So the message goes out wirelessly, it's encrypted, it goes to one of 3 or 4 individuals who have been screened to get the data, to get the message, and send for help to the parties intended that have been approved, pre-approved, so that we can be in contact with the individuals to see if help is needed, and if help is needed, they arrive. It's a win-win. It allows people to stay home and get some of the help they need, but totally privacy protected. Encryption was huge, safeguards in terms of who could access the data, how it was retained. It's just brilliant. So take a look if you'd like. This is on my website. We got a really nice letter from JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center, just before my last term as commissioner ended. And I thought, if they could understand the term, the Japanese private sector companies insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and they've become enlightened with privacy by design. I thought if they could understand positive sum and the benefits, then surely the rest of the world that speaks some English can embrace these ideas as well. Now, you might say, what's it going to cost me? A lot of companies ask me that. And I say, of course, there's going to be a small cost up front to build this in. But I assure you, it will be a fraction of the cost that you will have to pay when you incur a data breach or a privacy infraction. And I assure you, you will at some point if you don't do this. And these days, they're no longer lawsuits in response to data breaches and privacy complaints. They're class action lawsuits. The costs are staggering, but the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. And then combine that with the loss of consumer confidence and total trust deficit, you're far better in doing it proactively. Companies that I've talked to have all said, okay, yeah, we're going to do it because the cost up front is not that high. Now, of course, you all know about the GDPR, which has raised the privacy bar dramatically in the EU and just came into effect in May of 2018. And as you know, privacy by design, as data protection by design, and privacy as the default have been included for the first time in the GDPR. So I'm very excited about that. And while I would not be so bold as to say this, Information Age a few years ago said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. As I said, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But suffice it to say, a lot of people are thinking if you do PBD, you're going to go a long way in at least providing the EU with some indication of your wish to comply with the GDPR, absent any laws you may have that are considered to be adequate to it. And in my country, Canada has always enjoyed essential equivalence with the GDPR until now. In the past, we have, no longer with the GDPR. So our federal privacy commissioner, Daniel Terrien, went to the government last year and said, look, we need to upgrade our federal private sector legislation, and we need to add privacy by design in it. So this year, in February, the Parliamentary Committee on Privacy, Access, and Ethics came out with a report, and that's the title page, Towards Privacy by Design. So I'm very optimistic that hopefully later this year our law will be upgraded, include privacy by design, and hopefully we will achieve essential equivalence with the GDPR, which has enormous benefits to Canadians. Businesses want to be able to exchange data and do business with the EU without anything holding us back. So this will be a great move. I talked to you about privacy as the default, the second foundational principle, which is also included in the GDPR. I think this is one of the most important principles, that it gives you the comfort to know that you can rest assured that any personal data you've provided is only going to be used for the primary purpose of the data collection. That's the whole point of privacy laws, is restricting uses of information for the purposes intended, full stop. And we're now offering privacy by design certification in partnership with KPMG. We've relaunched it so that we can assure companies that are approaching me for privacy by design certification that in fact we have upgraded it to meet the requirements of the GDPR. So you can rest assured you will be compliant with the GDPR. And that's been very favorably received. Let me talk about surveillance for a moment. I have a lot of fears about surveillance. Starting a few years ago, the passing of the Investigatory Powers Bill in the UK, which was a nightmare. There was a lot of resistance to it, 100,000 signatures, really opposing the requirements of revealing all this information to the government. And as you may know, in 2018, earlier this year, they were talking about the Investigatory Powers Act has been ruled to have breached the EU law, the GDPR, because it allows data to be harvested for reasons other than fighting very serious crimes for which you can get a warrant, etc. So stay tuned on what's going to happen in the UK. But this is happening, unfortunately, all around the world. Not as bad as the Snoopers Charter in the UK, but people are worried about it becoming the new normal on the internet. Bruce Schneier, worldwide noted cryptographer, said surveillance is now the business model of the internet, regrettably. And it's all about the unintended consequences. That's what I always tell people, to beware of the unintended consequences of data. Sometimes they're called data fumes, because data produced as a byproduct of people's use of various devices and services. You've all heard of Internet of Things, connected devices. It's just a nightmare. And the data are being compiled and used like never before. In IoT, it's just like it's like the Wild West. People are racing out the door with their new devices and technologies without a scant thought to privacy and security. And those are the things that concern me. And IoT attacks, it's just a matter of when they're going to happen because there's no privacy or security embedded in the IoT. So attacking these devices and the infrastructure is going to be a piece of cake. And I am sure the hackers are all out there looking to these as their next targets. So again, I emphasize the need for encryption. I can't emphasize it enough. I've written about this over the years. This is one op-ed I did for our Canadian national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, where I talked about how important encryption was, crucial for our privacy and freedom. And I just had 2 other op-eds that appeared this year, which I haven't included, but it's along the same theme. So if you have any interest, you can Google the Globe and Mail. Now let me tell you about the debate over encryption. It drives me crazy. Whenever there's an increase in terrorist incident, dating back to Charlie Hebdo, San Bernardino, Manchester, Paris, on and on, the door closes to privacy and the pendulum swings right back to forget about privacy, we need security. Of course we do, but not to the exclusion of privacy. So now governments are all asking for these stupid backdoors, crypto backdoors that can break encryption. And I can't tell you how many years ago this came up before. I don't know if any of you were around at the time of the Clipper chip debate. Clipper chip was a backdoor that was envisioned at least 20 years ago. And I remember we spent a full year, people from all over the world talking about it and reviewing it. And everyone agreed at the end of the year, this was a bad idea. This would weaken all of the communications on the online world. And leading cryptographers in 2015 wrote an article called Keys Under Doormats. And the reason they created that wonderful title is just like you might put a key under your doormat to facilitate your children gaining entry into your home because they may have lost their keys. It will also facilitate the burglars from gaining entry into your home. And these brilliant cryptographers from all over the world came together and they talked about how mandating crypto backdoors, requiring a government access to all data and communications was just a disaster. Every single one. There were also articles in The Economist saying it's like finding a needle in a haystack, granting intelligence agencies the ability to intercept and collect all this data would create this haystack. They're not even going to find the terrorists even if they wanted to. And does that work? Does scanning everything, getting everybody's information work? It doesn't work. You can take a look at it. What we need is targeted surveillance, not indiscriminate surveillance, which are the phishing expeditions. Both privacy and security. Michael Chertoff, who was the second Secretary of Homeland Security in the United States, even he said, we can't have privacy without security. The most frustrating thing is when people treat privacy and security as if there were trade-offs. You must have both. And the NSA chief in the United States also said, we need encryption. It's foundational to our future. We must have both. And this I was referring to cryptographers and others who've been looking at this. They said, weakening encryption in the name of national security simply makes no sense because weakening encryption by creating backdoors for the use of the good guys will invariably attract the bad guys. They will also gain entry into this. It will weaken the entire communications infrastructure online. And again, Susan Landau, who's amazing, she's a brilliant cryptographer at Stanford. I've met with her many times. She's just brilliant. She appeared before a House Judiciary Committee in the United States to give testimony against what's called the encryption tightrope, balancing security and privacy. And she said, rather than providing us with better security, the FBI's efforts to mandate the creation of crypto backdoors will torpedo it. Encryption and other protections secure our systems. They should never be undermined. They're essential, absolutely essential. So please help me and others fight the new resurgence of the call for crypto backdoors by the Five Eyes, US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. This happened just a few months ago, and there's a resurgence of calling for cryptography backdoors. Don't let them happen. We all have to fight this like we did the Clipper chip 20 years ago. Now, privacy by design, I'm delighted, as I mentioned, has been included in this year's GDPR. I've started a new international global council for privacy and security by design. It's an extension of privacy by design, but I decided to expand it to include privacy and security by design to show that you must have both. They're both critical to our privacy and our freedom. Without security, we have nothing. And I'm delighted with the wonderful founding members who came forward to help me move this forward. One of our leading telcos in Canada is TELUS. So the CEO of TELUS, Darren Entwistle, joined right away. Michael Chertoff, I mentioned, was the second Secretary of Homeland Security in the US. Gilles de Kerchove is the Director of EU Counterterrorism. He joined right away. He said, of course we need to do this. And we have several others. The reason I'm showing this to you is because we must have interest in both privacy and security, not the zero-sum, forget about privacy, we only need security. We must have both. And if you have any interest in this and believe that we need both, I would love you to visit our website, www.gpsbydesign.org, and join our international council. There's no cost to joining. It would just indicate that you have an interest in this and you believe that we can do privacy and security, that we must have both represented, and they're both critical. So I'd love you to just take a look at our website if you have an interest, and I'd love it if you would join, but you don't have to, of course. And I'm teaching an online course on the global privacy framework because I wanted people all around the world to get asked about this, so I'm offering this online course. If you have any interest, take a look. Let me end, ladies and gentlemen, by just telling you the enormous benefits of being proactive on embedding both privacy and security into your operations right from the outset, from day one. Bake it into your code, bake it into your data architecture, weave it seamlessly throughout your operations. And that way, you will get the true win-win of multiple functionalities at the same time. You'll gain a competitive advantage. If you're a company, if you're a business, you will be able to tell your citizens, if you're a government, that you are going to great lengths to protect their privacy, and you have great respect for personal privacy and security by embedding it in design. So I would love you to consider these options, and if you have any interest, feel free to email me. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer. And if you really have an interest, I tweet every morning between 5:30 and 6 a.m. the leading stories of the day, so you could consider following me on Twitter if that's something you do, and get the latest privacy stories. I thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.